Hey everybody, it's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching the weekly Wringer series here on clanofthegraywolf.com. I told you guys I would be traveling during the course of the week. I did that. I'm back now, hence I'm recording a weekly Wringer. I had the aspiration of doing a recording, Commodore on the road, doing the weekly Wringer, and I've done that before. But to be honest, I was traveling for business and I was dead tired / doing stuff almost the entire time. And had very, very little time to do anything, so I didn't get to filming a video. But that's okay, because I'm here now and I'm not going to let the week pass by without posting something. So here is this here version, or this here episode of the Weekly Wringer. Good to be back and good to be rocking and rolling. You guys had a great response from last week's video, which was about video game preservation, a theme that I saw, I think, pretty universally at PAX. So I was really glad to see, some of you had some very strong feelings about it. I think there are a lot of things for us to talk about there, and I will. So once I get through all of your contributions and then throw in my own, we will move on then to a question for next week, which I think will hopefully get you digging back through your Nintendo back catalog for an answer. Anyway, all right. So first things that we always do here, or we try to do, at least when the situation warrants, is to welcome our new contributors. And this week is no different. This is a community here at the Clan of the Grey Wolf, yes, but also on the Weekly Wringer. Glad to have all of you on board. So I like to welcome people when they come on board to the Weekly Wringer and say hi and make sure we welcome you and hopefully keep you on board for a little while and doing some commenting of your own. So first is Nega Matt. I think that's a cool name. Nega Matt. Kind of works neat. You can kind of throw Nega in front of anything and make it neat, I think. But anyway, Nega Matt, welcome to you. The next one I'm not really sure how to pronounce, so I'm just going to give it a shot. Leoran Waters? Maybe it's Lioran? Leoran? Anyway, the point is, Leoran Waters, welcome to you as well. And, I got a message about this. This doesn't often happen, folks, but you see, when I shoot the video, many times, I have to kind of cut things off. I cut things off at wherever the comments are, and I actually go and shoot the video, and then I post the video, and then when someone comes back and posts a comment later on, it's not a part of the video. So we actually, Dragon Chi commented a week or so ago, and noticed that I didn't mention them as a new person in the videos because I actually shot the video before they had commented. So welcome to you. I don't often go back and check to see if people have added new comments to some of the old videos, but maybe I should start doing them. I should start looking through the old videos and looking for the new comment button. Because maybe there are people that are still commenting on Ringers of past. That would be pretty cool. Anyway, welcome to all of you. It's great to have you on board and great to have you part of the Weekly Wringer, and I hope to see many contributions from you in the future. All right, now the question that I asked last week was a doozy. It was about the importance, or what is the importance for you for the preservation of video games? And the reason I asked that question is because coming out of PAX East, I just kind of saw a theme. It was thematic, which is what that means. Anyway, the point is, there was a real centered theme in my opinion on PAX this year. Maybe just what I was interested in, but the theme was really preserving old video games, or preserving video games in general, not even old video games. And I thought that was a really cool topic, one that I'm sure we will definitely talk about in the future as well, and will probably permeate a lot of the conversations we have here at the Clan of the Grey Wolf and on the Weekly Wringer. But anyway, I asked you about what is the importance of video game preservation to you? Now, I gave a couple examples before I let the video go, but some of you went in a little bit of a different direction that I think I wasn't thinking about. And I'm going to try not to talk about as much. And that is, you have a bunch of stuff sitting in your closet that you bought, or your parents bought you when you were a kid. and you want to preserve those. That's not really what I was asking about. I mean, that's cool, and we should preserve that stuff. And I know for many of you that's very important. What I was talking about was the stuff that goes into making a video game, the making of kind of things. The things that are vital to video game development that then just get pitched and tossed many times after a video game is completed, when, you know, I find that to be kind of a crime in many cases. For some of my favorite video games, some of the best video games ever made, right? So, what did you guys, but anyway, the point is, many of you went in a very different direction, and that's cool, I think that's neat, but that's not really the way I was going to go. It is a preservation question, and we will talk about it, but I'll only talk about it in a little, kind of a smaller part of the conversation rather than a larger part of the conversation. So let's start here. A lot of comments to talk about, so I want to get right into them. The bow tie guy talked about, the infancy of video games relative to other media, and I think this is absolutely true. Films 100 years ago, people forget 100, because I mean, really, they were invented 100 years ago and just starting to kind of make their debut. But if you look back even 50 years, many film companies, and this was brought up at PAX East, many film companies saw no value in preserving their old back catalogs. Zero. So they would take original film reels of the cut of the film, the one by which all other films were created, and they would pitch them either in a warehouse and say that that was adequate. That might have been damp and dark, and dark's not bad for preservation, but damp is. Just not an ideal dusty kind of environment that wasn't, kind of vacuum controlled, and certainly wasn't very well preserved, as it were. And so they would put these films out there and just say that's good enough, or they just throw them away. I mean, why have a copy of this film when there are hundreds of copies that they threw out to theaters all over the country, and they probably exist somewhere else? It's not really important for us to keep one of the original here, right? So maybe the question of importance has to do with how young video games really are in comparison. The first video games weren't even really things that you could actually record on any kind of media. One of the things we talked about at PAX East was the old oscilloscopes that were used for something like Tennis for Two, which is largely regarded as the first video game ever. That is virtually impossible to reproduce. There were no magnetic discs, there was no flash memory. It was simply the kind of analog wiring of an oscilloscope, and the programming that was utilized back then was very, very, very rudimentary, and not at all held in a random state like we see today in random access memory. So it's the infancy of the medium certainly contributes to the fact that we're not seeing a lot of import on the preservation of video games today, and I think the Bowtie guy hit that one out of the park. He's absolutely right. Lord of Nothing talked about the idea that emulation is not good enough as a preservation mechanism, and I think that's true. And many of you have a theory about that. We'll get to that in just a second. But emulation is not good enough for a couple reasons. One, the experience is not the same. It doesn't really get to the same experience level for a game that isn't on its native form that it was designed for, so on and so forth, right? Completely agree, completely understand. So emulation is not good enough in that regard. It's not good enough for a lot of different reasons, but for Lord of Nothing, emulation is not the way to preserve games, and I agree, because again, if we're talking emulation, we're not talking about the stuff that is, the making of, the things that are behind the scenes, the art. Guys, forget the video game itself. The video game itself is something you can get everywhere, mostly. We'll talk about some examples here in a little bit of why not. But you can largely get those cartridges anywhere, and anybody can do a ROM dump. That's stupid. That's not video game preservation. I mean, you can archive that, right? That was the earliest argument for having ROMs, is that they were part of archives. Because if you were archiving those things for posterity, then, have at it. So I think archiving is cool, but what about the experience of making a video game? The people, the art, the decisions that went into these games. Those things need to be preserved, don't they? That's what I'm talking about. And emulation does nothing to help us with that. So emulation is not good enough. Mr. K has an important point, I think, that was then picked up and run with by many of you, and that is that data is data, and that medium doesn't matter. It's a matter of being able to preserve the data and put the data anywhere that you need to be able to experience it. I have to say, I disagree with this with every fiber of my being. It is impossible to disagree with something more than this. I just do not think this has any validity whatsoever. If I can easily preserve, as I said, do a ROM dump of every NES game ever, and I could play them on my phone, and I could hear the music and look at the scenes and watch Mega Man jump around on the screen. I could do all of those things. I could, do ROM dumps of N64 ROMs and play them, on my iPad or put them on my TV through my Xbox, whatever the case might be. That is, first of all, data is not data. And secondly, the medium matters more than almost anything, I would argue. I mean, first of all, there's virtually 60, 70 years of scholarship behind this, right? A very, very famous Canadian theorist. Am I using that right or wrong? Theorist. That's not right. Anyway, my mind is not working, guys. I'm still totally just blown up by it. If you can see the dark circls on my eyes, I haven't done a lot of sleeping. Anyway, theorist is what I was trying to say. My goodness. Anyway, a very famous theorist named Marshall McLuhan would disagree 100% with you. And by the way, if any of you want to go look him up, he's a very, very famous theorist. He's, one of the people that really defined what the internet would look like 50 years before it became widespread, right? The global village, that's his idea. The idea of medium is the message. In other words, the medium is supremely important. If you play an NES game on your Xbox with your 70-inch television, stretched out, pixelated, looking like garbage, or looking great, whatever you want, even with the filters, whatever, right? Versus if you play it on your NES, run through a CRT television, you're telling me the experience isn't any different. Data is data, the game is exactly the same. I cannot come up with any case that would be valid. It's not. Data is not data, that's point number one. Because data, as it's, the preservation of the data is not the issue. Although, in some cases, it actually is, right? So, bit rot, those kinds of things actually do end up harming data. What happens when data has bit flip? Your Windows PC starts slowing down after a couple of years, sometimes even just after a couple of months or weeks, because of bit flip, right? You have a valid copy of Windows, you've done all the kinds of things, but all of a sudden the bits flip, and the next thing you know, you don't have a working copy of Windows, or it's slower than molasses, or what have you, right? It's just because data storage is not what it is. So data is not always data, number one. And number two, I would say this. Again, it doesn't speak to the validity of all the data that is important to archive before a game is ever produced or released to market. That's what needs to be preserved. And there is no amount of media out there that can handle that data that would make that experience the same. It needs to be, in my opinion, experienced in that same format. So, Mr. K's point is that the medium doesn't matter and the data is data. I tend to agree with a few folks that said completely the opposite later on. I've already kind of made my point on that. But, I understand where Mr. K is coming from. I understand that the way that we have our data today, it seems ubiquitous, it seems real, it seems forever, but it's not, and that's the point. I think if it were that way, the world would look very different than it does today, but this is reality. Mike KE352, good to see you, man. Great to have you back, like one of the original folks from the Weekly Ringers. Here we are, so much later. Talking about one of those examples, Panzer Dragoon. having the source code completely lost. So it's very